Okay, let's dive into this explainer. Today, we're exploring a historic true crime event that completely shocked the nation. And, well, the incredibly complex legal math that follows a tragedy of this magnitude. It's a rapid-fire story of extreme violence, dark psychology, and the absolute unyielding finality of our justice system. So, buckle up. We have to start with the central, burning question that haunted Hamilton, Ohio for decades. What exactly happened inside 635 Minor Avenue on March 30th, 1975? I mean, this was supposed to be a joyful family gathering for Easter dinner, but in a matter of minutes, it turned into an absolute nightmare. 11. That is the staggering death toll here. 11 family members, including 8 young children, were wiped out. And you know what the most chilling detail is? There was absolutely no sign of a struggle. None. Nobody had a chance to flee or fight back. 44! That's how many shots were fired. 41-year-old James Ruppert descended his stairs carrying 4 guns and just started shooting. And with terrifying, almost unbelievable accuracy, 40 of those 44 shots hit their exact marks. Now, the timeline of this day is deeply, deeply disturbing. Ruppert woke up around 4 p.m. and the shooting began at 6. But here's the kicker. He didn't even call the police until 9:40 p.m. He spent over 3 eerie hours just sitting on his sofa, surrounded by absolute carnage, while a skillet of hamburger helper just sat there waiting on the stove. Naturally, law enforcement was completely baffled. I mean, Police Chief George McNally flat out said, "This kind of murder usually has a motive like sex, greed, or jealousy. We can't find any of those things here." Having a suspect just calmly waiting at the front door left investigators totally scratching their heads, desperately searching for a why. And that sheer lack of clarity, it set the perfect stage for a massive courtroom clash. The trial essentially boiled down to 2 diametrically opposed theories. On one side, a calculated act of greed to erase mounting debts. On the other, severe paranoia and a total, terrifying break from reality. The state built a highly methodical case. They argued Ruppert stood to gain a massive $250,000 inheritance. They pointed out his devastating stock market losses, his recent target practice, and the massive debts he owed to his own family. To the prosecution, this wasn't sudden madness. This brilliantly illustrates a cold, calculated decision to just erase his financial problems. The defense, however, presented a deeply troubled mind. Psychiatrists testified to severe paranoid delusions, like Ruppert literally believed the FBI was actively plotting against him. They detailed decades of intense childhood trauma, impotence at 26, and his mother's very open, painful rejection. To them, he was a broken man who had finally been pushed way beyond the brink of sanity. What followed was an absolute chaotic rollercoaster of a legal process. The initial 1975 trial ended in a mistrial thanks to a highly confused jury. Then, a retrial and finally resulted in 11 consecutive life terms. But wait, it doesn't end there. A pivotal 1982 appeal tore that up and led to a final, 3rd trial. And in that 1982 trial, the verdict was incredibly unusual. Ruppert was found guilty of murdering his mother and his brother, which meant 2 life sentences. But he was found not guilty by reason of insanity for the other 9 victims. Just think about that for a second. Now, what's really interesting about this next piece of the puzzle is the legal mechanics behind it all. Once the gavel falls, the narrative totally shifts from the dramatic courtroom to the cold reality of the Department of Rehabilitation and Correction. How exactly does the state calculate a lifetime behind bars when these consecutive counts are involved? Well, in Ohio, an indefinite sentence has both a minimum and a maximum range. This is completely distinct from a full life sentence, which literally has no minimum at all. This exact legal distinction dictates how long an inmate must physically stay behind bars before they even get a chance to see a parole board. To put this into perspective, let's look at how the Bureau of Sentence Computation does the math. They take these consecutive counts and basically add them together to create an aggregate minimum. It's a precise, bureaucratic formula that literally compounds multiple life terms into an impenetrable, towering wall of time. So what happens when inmates try to dispute these calculations? The courts step in with incredibly rigid procedural rules. The court will assume the factual allegations in an inmate's complaint are true, sure, but if they lack an actual legal remedy, like trying to argue against clearly established sentence limits, well, the case is swiftly thrown out with just the stroke of a magistrate's pen.
Challenging these minimums for parole eligibility is a staggering uphill battle. It's almost impossible. We see it all the time in standard judgment entries. Courts simply adopt the magistrate's decision and deny the petition right then and there. The whole system is deliberately designed to be resolute and unyielding.
Just look at how it's done today. An electronic signature from a judge represents the cold, modern, bureaucratic finality of our legal system. With a single digital keystroke, an inmate's lifetime fate is permanently sealed. There's zero emotion involved here, just the rigid, mechanical application of the law. The crucial point is that the justice system relies entirely on this meticulous, almost sterile documentation, logging every single motion to strike, dismiss, and clarify. Ultimately, it is the paperwork itself that ensures the prison doors stay locked tight over these violent, long-term sentences. And, that exact paperwork determined James Ruppert's day-to-day reality. Serving his time at the Allen Oakwood Correctional Institution, his remaining days were entirely governed by those exact aggregate sentence computations we just talked about. Because he had consecutive sentences, Ruppert did eventually see the parole board. But let's be real, the results were a foregone conclusion. 1995, parole denied. 2005, parole denied. 2015, denied again. The board consistently cited his total lack of rehabilitation and the intense, lingering opposition from the community. His next hearing was actually scheduled for 2025, but he never made it. On June 4, 2022, James Ruppert died at a medical facility at the age of 88. The man who perpetrated the horrific Easter Sunday massacre spent nearly half a century in state custody before his sentence finally expired, along with his life. But while Ruppert's story ends in a prison hospital bed, we have to bring the narrative back to Hamilton, Ohio. What exactly happens to the physical space where 11 people lost their lives in a single afternoon? What is the actual day-to-day legacy of a murder house? The reality is deeply, deeply eerie. Years later, a tenant living in the home with her kids noted that decades-old bloodstains were still visible in the basement. She remarked that, if she stops and thinks about it, sure, it's creepy, but surprisingly, it didn't make her feel any less safe. However, plenty of others strongly disagreed. For years, families would move in, get spooked, and quickly move right back out. The property was plagued by persistent rumors of hauntings. Lights suddenly flickering on and off, doors slamming shut, and the chilling sound of thudding footsteps coming down the stairs, mimicking that fateful Easter afternoon. The house often sat completely abandoned for years at a time, acting as a physical, unavoidable scar on the community. And as we wrap up this explainer, we're left to ponder the incredible, heavy permanence of such a tragedy. Now that James Ruppert is gone and the cold legal math of his sentence has finally concluded, can the spirits of the Ruppert family finally rest in peace?